3, 2, 1. And we're here once again, conversations with interesting people. And our guest, I'm so excited today, is Dan Grinstead. And Dan, I don't know how long it's been since I've seen you, but it's so great to see you again. We were catching up just before we turned the mics on. And man, we had to stop because it's so interesting. And you and I were just getting back into that banter and that flow we had all those years ago at the university. So how have you been, man?
I've been pretty good. Health-wise, I'm doing fine. I had a couple bouts with cancer, but that's all behind me now. I got this great scar on my head now, but it's not enough to scare people. That's why I cut my hair a little bit shorter so people can say to me, "Oh man, look at that guy's head. What happened to him?" And it's just a little tumor. Nothing to get worried about, and so doing good.
That's the tough Army guy. Well, I had a few bouts with cancer, a little bit of a tumor. I'm not going to let that stop me.
No, and you just go with the flow. And what are you going to do? You learn over time that there's things that you have some control over, things that you have no control over, and so those things you have no control over, don't worry about it.
It's a great way to look at it. I think that's a lot easier to say than it is to do. And then there's the things we wish we had control over, but we don't.
That's right.
And those are the things that piss us off.
Yeah.
But that's the crux of life, right?
That's right. The only thing we have some control over is how we respond to life. And that's it. Now, this is no wisdom from me. I've been spending a lot of time now that I'm retired reading books that I should have read in college but didn't. So I'm reading lots of books related to philosophy. So that's where I'm getting this. There are things that you have control, no control, and some control. And and that fits in very well with the kind of work that I did as a social worker. If I were still practicing, this is the kind of stuff I would be saying to patients now. Well, do you have any control over that? No. Well, hey, don't worry about it if you can't. Just control what you can and try to move on with life from there.
Definitely. And we definitely should talk about that because philosophy is a great interest of mine. I know that you and I share a great love for Thich Nhat Hanh's writing.
Exactly.
And you threw in there a little bit just to give people a little bit of background. So I first met you 7 or 8 years ago when I started my internship at the University of Iowa. You were on staff as one of the social workers. Tell us about you dropped that in there. Tell us about your training, what made you want to go into social work and kind of what your career looked like. And then we'll get into the military stuff later for sure.
Okay. Well, I graduated from high school in 1968. All right. So let's reflect back on what happened in 1968. The country was in flames. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago was a police riot. So all those things happened before I started college, in the summer before I started college. So all those things sort of percolated around in my mind, and I thought, maybe I should be a helping person. My family used to think that I was going to go into the ministry. But then I flunked confirmation class, and that sort of put the kibosh on that. But I still knew that I wanted to help people. And so from the first day of college on, I knew I wanted to be a social worker. And fortunately, that job fit who I am. And that's what we need to do. Who are you? And get a job to do that.
Yeah. So I know I told you this years ago, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but I could never shake the feeling that you reminded me of my dad quite a bit. And my dad died when I was in medical school, and he was a social worker. And I never really knew exactly what Dad did. And then I was extra sad when I got into residency and began to appreciate the enormous number of things that the social workers were doing, because I wished I could have a conversation with him and thank him for all the years that he did it. But so tell us a little bit about if one wanted to be a social worker.
Yes.
What's the basic training process? Bachelor's, master's, what's the crux?
My recommendation would be both bachelor's in social work and then master's in social work, because the master's will give you the road to licensing. So to do anything, you have to have a license in social work.
Okay.
And so to me, that's the way to go. And then as consumers out there, if you're working with somebody who calls themselves a social worker, which many people do and don't have the training, it'd be just like myself calling myself a doctor. Oh, sure you're a doctor. Yeah, I got this diploma off Google, But I think you need to have that license so that protects the public from people who are being disingenuous about their training.
Sure. So a bachelor's of social work, 4 years. Master's, the MSW is what, 2 years, 3 years?
For me, I got a deal I couldn't refuse. I went to the University of Minnesota in Duluth. They had a program at that time that if you had a bachelor's degree in social work and work experience, that you could get a master's in 12 months.
Wow.
And to me, that made perfectly good sense economically and just professionally. I thought, oh, this is what I want to do. And I did.
Great. And so you mentioned then the licensing process, and they call that the LI, right? The LISW, right? And
Licensed Independent Social Worker, which means that if I wanted to, I could set up a private practice and counsel people privately.
So I think a lot of people have heard the term social worker, and this may be such a broad question that it's difficult to answer concisely. But I mean, what are some of the things that a social worker does? So if someone meets someone at a party and they go, "I'm going into social work," like what are some things that means?
Well, there could be let's start on a big level and then go down to a smaller level.
Sure.
On a big level, it could be doing things like community organizing. So you pick a community and you recognize a problem, and you bring members of the community together to try to solve that problem. So it'd be kind of in the political vein that you might do things. And then as you go smaller, social workers could do individual counseling or group counseling. And in a hospital setting where I spent my entire career, it's being part of a team where we all work together to move the patient through the system. We recognize a problem, we fix the problem in the hospital, and then arrange for follow-up care so that the problem does not reoccur. And so at the university, when I was an inpatient psychiatry social worker, the biggest part of the job was arranging for follow-up care.
Yeah.
And that became more difficult over the years as statewide resources changed.
Yes. So one of the things that I don't know that everybody knows, but we certainly are aware of. So Iowa is number 50 in terms of mental health care. So we're the last. And the former governor of Iowa, now the ambassador to China, certainly did his share to shut down a couple of the mental health institutes. And it seems like from the minute that I was an intern until the present day, there's never enough beds. Then there's never enough placement, which is where you and I interacted a lot,
right.
And your colleagues, in terms of like, for people that are listening that don't know, there's a view, I think, that people get sent to the hospital sort of in The Girl Interrupted, whether you've read the book or seen the movie. People go to the hospital for psych and they're there for a year, or 8 months, and that's just not, maybe it was that way at one point, but it certainly isn't now. It's supposed to be stabilization and that's where the social worker comes in
Right.
a lot.
Right. You know as well as I do that at any given day, at any given hour, there are people with psychiatric illnesses sitting in emergency rooms. Waiting,
For days sometimes.
Waiting for a bed to open. So there are staff members in any emergency room anywhere in Iowa whose job it is to call hospitals who have psychiatric inpatient units to ask the question, do you have a bed today?
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that a patient from Iowa City comes into the emergency room and there are no beds available, and someone starts calling around. They could find a bed in Des Moines, they could find a bed in Sioux City, and then there's a cost associated with sending that patient to Des Moines or Sioux City. And then the social cost is you're isolating them from their support system.
Yep.
Their family's in Iowa City, but they're in Des Moines or Sioux City. And you need that social support system as part of the treatment process. And that's unfortunately the way things go now.
Yeah. And as I understand it, so my parents met working. I always stress working, my parents met working at the Mental Health Institute in Clarinda, where my family has been for many generations. And then in the 70s, the late 70s when I was born, it was in the height of deinstitutionalization. And the general idea was that we want to get people back to that support system that you were talking about. Kennedy, which was before then, obviously, Kennedy was sort of big into that. And then, but it seems like the idea of these community programs hasn't manifested in the way that kind of everybody thought, or maybe it did and it kind of went away. I mean, I feel like I lack some of the history here, but you being in high school in the 60s and then you worked through the 70s, I mean, what have you seen and what's your take on the current system? How can we make it better? Fix the problem for us, Dan. What should we do?
You know, the old model that we had where we had 4 mental health institutes in each corner of the state worked well because it put patients in proximity with their families. And so we go back to that. The other system that worked well is that many counties had county homes.
Yeah.
If you look at the history of that, they were called county poor farms. And many of these county homes were farms. They were working farms. And so the idea was if somebody couldn't take care of themselves, you put them in a facility that was not that different from being at home. You worked in the garden. They may have had row crops, they may have had cattle, but that was familiar work to many people. So now the county homes have gone by the wayside too, and so you don't have that particular resource available anymore either. So towards the end, it was getting so hard to find places for patients to go that I would call 100 different facilities trying to find a place for one of our patients to go. And oftentimes, in defense of the facilities, the patients were difficult, very difficult. And so if they had any violent behavior towards staff, that was almost a no-go.
Automatic rule out, yeah.
You know, they were going to be stuck at the university because no one wants to put their staff at risk.
Yeah.
And you could understand that clearly. But those patients in the past might have gone to a mental health institute. Mm-hmm. But now they could be stuck.
Right, and the only ones that are left are Independence and Cherokee, right? Because the other ones are gone. It's funny because, like I said earlier, every time we ever talked, I think about my dad, and either one of my parents would have answered that question exactly like you just did, which I grew up hearing about the county farms and the county homes, and it gave people a place to go and a place to be and something to do.
Right.
You know, where they felt like, you know, they were being useful to society. I mean, I think that's the thing. I think people have a tendency to write off mental illness. Well, I know people have a tendency to write off mental illness as just sort of people that are weak, or, you know, they're sort of the untouchables. But these are human beings that want to contribute to society, and a lot of them have families. And
that's right. It was useful work. You know, we talk about the farm to table movement. Mm-hmm. They were doing that way back when. They grew their own vegetables. And so it was economically a smart thing to do to have the farm there. And it was familiar work. Now, today, because we are not as rurally dependent on rural economy for work as we used to be, there would be a lot of people in the county homes who've never been on the farm and so wouldn't know how to work there.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. So what could we be doing better then? I mean, if you had a magic wand and the reins to control it, you know, it's been a while since I've been in the inpatient type setting, but I know HAB homes were kind of a big thing that was coming up when I was leaving. And then just, you know, the idea of group homes, which is a similar kind of concept.
Sure.
Or, I mean, so what do we do?
All of those things, and we could do more in-home services, partial programs where somebody comes in during the daytime and goes home at night. And, you know, we have, at the university, we were leaders in some of the innovative kinds of programs where our staff would go out to patients' homes and see them every day and make sure that they were taking their medicines and provided the services that were needed. And that was quite successful in keeping people out of the hospital.
Yeah, I think the partial hospital program systems are very interesting. They're a nice step when you don't require inpatient care, but it gives you a little bit more than just following up with your doctor or your therapist. I know that the U has one, St. Luke's has one. I'm sure for those of you listening that are in other parts of the country, that some of the hospital systems probably have something similar. They may have different names.
Sure.
But it's I think it's a really good model. I don't even know how long the U had that. Were you there when they implemented that?
Yes. And so that was a good thing that we did that. And now you can anticipate that we would put technology to use and do some telemedicine.
Right.
I see that as a potentially good thing too, because we still have the problem of travel time, distance.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a lot of money, getting to Iowa City can be hard. And then once you get to the university, it can be quite confusing for people who haven't been there very much. It's a huge place.
Yeah. And I think you're right, especially in the more rural states where there's so much distance in between. We have 99 counties here, and you hear stories in places like Wyoming where it's hundreds of miles in between the nearest doctors. I mean, and then there's so few child providers like I See Kids. I mean, how and psychiatry, it seems like no matter how many residencies there are, we're not getting as many people wanting to match. It's mental health care it's tough.
It is very tough, but it's also very rewarding. And I say this because people are so interesting in terms of what's going on and what their thinking process is. You can't make these things up. I always wanted to do a study that would answer the question, do delusional thoughts match technology?
Okay.
So here would be the question. Back when the telegraph was invented, were there people that thought, that telegraph's just talking to me? We know that happens today with television. The television's talking to me, telling me things to do. The radio's telling me things to do. So I wonder over time if those kinds of thoughts have matched technology.
What do you think?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. And you can just hear somebody. You hear that? That's Morse code. They're talking to me.
Yeah. So we call those like delusions of reference or ideas of reference. And we were talking before we started recording. You and I have to be careful when we talk about actual patients.
Exactly.
Because just as a caveat, our goal would never be to call anybody out, make fun of anybody. That would not be our goal. But you do get so many interesting stories. And I remember what you're talking about, reading about ideas of reference in school and thinking to myself, yeah, I mean, that may happen every now and then, but I mean, am I going to see that? And I saw that all the time at the U. People that believed the late night comedians were making fun of them directly.
Exactly.
And I remember talking to this one person, and if you hadn't known they had that delusion, they were as normal as mom and apple pie.
Exactly.
And I remember saying to this particular person who had the thing about the late night comedians, with all due respect, and I said to this person, I'm the same way. They're not talking about me because I'm nobody. And basically, like, you're not anybody famous either. Like, if you were Brad Pitt or you were somebody, who's in the news, you were Donald Trump. He wasn't the president back then. But then I could see that. And this person looked me in the eye and said, Adam, I completely agree with you. There's absolutely no reason why they should be talking about me, but all I can tell you is they are.
That's right. And I know you, like, I always take those stories very seriously because that was the problem as a patient was stating it. You may think, wow, but you take that very, very seriously because that's where the patient is, and you start where the patient is always.
Well, and to them, it's very much real. And I remember asking that person to give me an example, and they said they had been out shopping and there were jokes about shopping, and therefore, so it wasn't just completely random. I mean, they had reasons why. And what I think is really interesting is now that fMRI has become more and more of a thing, they have taken fMRIs of people without mental illness, and like as you're hearing my voice, if I had an fMRI on you, certain parts of your brain would be lighting up. And then they took people that have hallucinations of voices and put them in an fMRI, and the same parts of the brain light up. So what that means is, for those people that have auditory hallucinations, those voices are just as real in their brain as they would be if I were talking to them and so forth. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and let me give you an example why you have to take these things seriously. Imagine if Jesus walked into an emergency room today.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I was walking on water over here, and I turned this water into wine. He'd be committed so quick that your head would explode.
Yeah.
So you always have to take those things seriously.
Right. And again, I would love to walk down the religion and delusion conversation, but I'll try to avoid that tonight. I mean, there's so many things in there that are true. And again, you have to, like you say, meet the patient where they are. And historically speaking, if you look back through a variety of holy books, the Bible being one, but even back into the ancient Sumerian texts, if you can read with a lens of somebody that didn't know anything about science, you can see mental illness all throughout humanity. And we don't exactly know if other animals experience it, because we don't have a good way of knowing what they're thinking. But it seems like definitely since humans have been recording anything, and probably long before then, there's always been, with this higher cognition, or maybe not, like I say, I don't know about the animals, but there seems to be a line where, it's just part of it. And you hear stories of people that, like, so in the Bible, people cutting themselves with stones and hearing demons and all this stuff. And I mean, could it have been demons? I don't think so, but I guess. But it's...
Yeah, who knows?
We both had people who are hearing things in their head telling them similar things. And so I think I always found that there was a, sort of a link between the people often found comfort in a lot of the religious stories, I think, because I think there was a sense of, that sounds a lot like what I'm experiencing. The people that are possessed or that are hearing things in their head. Do you ever sort of see that connection in there yourself?
Oh, absolutely. We all have those inner thoughts, and that's the whole purpose of groups. Is, you're thinking that way too? Wow, I thought it was only me.
Yeah.
And that's why we have support groups, so people can learn that, hey, other people have these same thoughts, and what I thought was just me going crazy really isn't.
Yeah.
And then, well, how did you get over that? Well, here's what I did. No kidding, I've never thought of that. Thank you.
I'm sure there's at least one person listening thinking to themselves, man, especially Adam, it sounds very cynical, right? Because we're saying, we're taking it seriously, but how do we know, as an example, that what they're experiencing isn't real, or then if we're taking it as real, then what's the line of where we treat? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Well, sure. And those are the philosophical questions that'll be debated forever, and it's way above, to use a military term, way above our pay grade.
That's right.
To sort these things out.
Yeah, it's tough. I guess that one of the things that I came to a conclusion, you remember Judith Crossett?
Oh, absolutely.
So Dr. Crossett was the first attending I worked with as an intern, and she is she's a pastor or a deacon or something within her church. And so she and I often had these conversations of the intersection of mental health and religion. And one of the things that I would always say is, if truly you heard a divine voice, I don't think an antipsychotic would stop it.
Interesting thought.
And my wife is from Fairfield, where they have some thoughts that can be a little out there. And I actually had that conversation with one of her friends once, who was saying to me, well, you guys treat these hallucinations. Don't you think they're just hearing voices of the ancestors that have moved on, or angels or demons or so forth. And that was pretty much my answer. Well, if it can be stopped with an antipsychotic, it's not a very powerful spiritual being then.
Yeah. It's good that you should mention Fairfield, because I got a scholarship to learn how to meditate. And so
Excellent.
I'm meditating now.
Excellent. So you went down to Fairfield and took TM.
I did.
Who was your teacher?
Bill Herlin.
Okay.
And I just had lunch with him yesterday.
Excellent.
And so learning to meditate has sparked me to read many, many other things, other books that I wouldn't have read. And I got the scholarship came from a fellow named Jerry Yellen. Jerry was in the Air Force during World War II. He was a fighter pilot and flew P-51 Mustangs. And so for those of you who aren't into World War history, the Mustang was a fighter plane that was very fast and was very good. He was flying a mission over Tokyo on the last day of the war and didn't know the war was over.
Wow.
And his wingman didn't return that day. But Jerry learned to meditate, and he saw meditation as a tool to help fight military suicides. And so he offered scholarships through the David Lynch Foundation to many people in the military, including myself, to learn how to meditate.
So what do you think? What do you think of TM?
Oh, I like it. I like it a lot. And it meshes in with some of the other authors like Thich Nhat Hanh and Eckhart Tolle is somebody I'm reading now. And it all works together. And when you look at some of the tools we use, like cognitive behavioral therapy, it goes back to the ancients.
Yeah.
You know, all the ancient philosophers would take road trips to Egypt, where they learned mathematics and they learned to meditate. And that was just routine for them to do that. And so you think about that word, why has all that gone away?
Yeah.
And now we see, for example, in the news this week, the Dubuque schools are using meditation and yoga to help their kids calm down and be in a better environment for learning.
Yeah.
So it all comes around. And so
I think one of the things we've seen a big rise in the popularity of mindfulness, and Sam Harris is one of my heroes, and he has an entire book and an app, about mindfulness, and that's certainly like Han's type practice would be closer to mindfulness, but then I think one of the things as the noise of technology continues to increase. We're never very far away from our phones. We've got 18 million social media apps all vying for our attention at once, although we really appreciate you all listening to this show.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that there's this longing for silence that people have and don't really realize it. And I think, again, one of the things about TM that I liked, because I took TM when I was dating who is now my wife, down in Fairfield, because for those of you that don't know, Fairfield, Iowa is the world headquarters of transcendental meditation, and they bought a university down there, and so it's named after the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was the one that taught the Beatles to meditate. Right. And there's lots of famous people that go to Fairfield, like Oprah did a big thing down there, and Hugh Jackman and Jim Carrey was down there not that long ago. It's a different form of meditation where in mindfulness you sort of focus on your breath and try to stay in the present moment. With TM, you're given a mantra, and we're not allowed to say what our mantras are. It's one of the big things, but they give you a mantra, and then you sort of use the mantra to help sort of focus the mind, and then as you practice more and more, you learn to sort of transcend this reality, so to speak, is the general idea. And there's a lot of really cool medical research about a variety of the meditations. One of the books I don't know if you've read is Transcendence by Norm Rosenthal.
I'll put it on my list.
So when I was first going down to Fairfield to court this woman that I now have a child with and have been married to for however many years, there's a guy down there that helps. He flies in some of the famous people. His name is Wally Devassier, and everyone in Fairfield knows who Wally is. Wally helps run the Peace Palaces down there, which are across the street from the Golden Domes.
Yes.
And so Wally realized pretty quickly that I had a scientific mind. Norm Rosenthal is a psychiatrist. I think he's from Sweden, but he's somewhere in the Scandinavian countries. His first book is called Winter Blues. He's the man that describes seasonal affective disorder.
Okay.
And so his book called Transcendence is beautifully written. It has enough science in it that someone like me likes it, but it doesn't read like a textbook. He has a lot of like anecdotal stories about the things that TM does, and anyway, it's a great read. And then where I was going with all of this, with both the kind of meditations, is that you don't have to be religious to get involved with it. I think there's a big belief. Oh, what, I got to become a Buddhist? I got to become a Hindu?
Yes. And you don't.
Right. So, and the Bible talks about Jesus meditating, going off on his own, and prayer is basically meditation, right? I mean,
Exactly.
we're sort of alone with our thoughts, those kind of. Have you ever done a silent retreat or anything like that?
I have not. The closest that I've come to doing a retreat is when I went to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because at night I would retreat to my room and I'd be reading things that you wouldn't expect a soldier to be reading in Afghanistan. So as an example, I was reading the Dalai Lama.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I could. And I thought, well, let's see what the Dalai Lama has to say. And so that started me down a path to reading all kinds of other people. But let me give you an example of what meditation does for me.
Sure.
It improves my senses. Okay? So in the morning, when the birds are singing, some people may say, oh, those birds are so loud. And I say, those birds are singing this morning, I'm getting a free concert. And so I listen to it that way. Another example, again with sound. Many trains go through Iowa City every day. And when they go through a crossing, they have to blow their whistle. Now there's a pattern to that. And I know that pattern, I'm not going to tell you. What I would say is to the people out there, listen for the pattern. There's a pattern to the whistle.
Okay.
And then there's a train coming going to cross the road. But there's a pattern. And so then, the birds, the cardinals have a song.
Mm-hmm.
All the birds have their own song, and you can listen to that. So when I was in Germany 3-4 weeks ago, I have all these odd thoughts. I wondered what does a dog say in German? Because we say a dog probably says bark, bark, bark.
Sure.
The Germans say the dog says woof, woof, woof. Okay, and I thought that was funny. I don't know what possessed me to ask that question, but I did. So then the follow-up question was, what's a cow say in German? And they said, moo. Wow, our cows are bilingual.
That's
so
funny.
I just had fun with that. I didn't go on anymore. You
Funny.
didn't want people to think, what's wrong with this American guy who wants to know what a cow says. But, I had some fun like that.
I remember being in a train station in France, and there was a guy with a dog, and I was trying to figure out how to buy something. And, of course, the French all speak English, but they wouldn't speak English to me because they were being French.
Yeah.
All due respect to the country of France. But this guy had a dog. He was an older guy, and the dog sort of got off the leash, and he started to run. And the guy yelled something at him in French, and the dog stopped and turned around. And I thought, damn it, the dog speaks French better than I do. Man, that's hysterical. So, okay, Dan, you dropped something in there that we were obviously gonna get to. Like, we can talk about meditation, we can talk about philosophy. I'm sure we'll get back to it. But one of the reasons that you're definitely more than qualified to be on a program like this is your experience with the military. And you mentioned being in Afghanistan. So it's such a fascinating story, and I don't even want to lead into it. I just want to leave it there and let you tell us all about what you did. You made a decision, and it's a great story. Tell us all about it.
Okay, so the routine on an inpatient psychiatry unit is you have a team meeting every morning where the doctors and the social workers and the nurses and the physical therapist and the occupational therapist or we all sit down and go through each patient and get on the same page of what we're going to do. Well, one day one of the psychiatry residents turned to me and said, "Hey, Dan, did you know the National Guard is looking for social workers?" And I looked at him and said, "No, I didn't. But do you know how old I am?" He said, "Well, how old are you?" At that time, I was 55. And he said, "Yeah, no problem. There's something called an age waiver." I said, "Okay, I'll think about it." So I thought about it for a couple of years.
A couple of years.
And I called the recruiter. And I said, let's have a serious conversation about this because it's something I'm interested in. And, what sort of the pre-thoughts were driven by September 11th, 2001. I was waiting that day for the president to come on and say, "We want you all to go down to the recruiting stations and sign up." He didn't say that. He said, "Don't let this make your life any different. Just go ahead and go on about your business."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I decided to call the recruiter, and the recruiter said, "Well, I'll come down to your office and we'll have a conversation." So he did. He walked into my office and he said, "Oh, you look pretty good in a uniform." I said, "Well, thank you, sir." And then he said, "Can you run?" I said, how far do you want me to run?" He said, 2 miles. I said, "Well, sir, I run marathons, so 2 miles, that's
It's warming up.
warming up, And he said, "Prove it." Okay, I'll prove it to you. So the Army physical fitness test at that time, has now changed, was running 2 miles, doing sit-ups, and doing push-ups. And so I went with the resident doctor who was my proctor, and he did the timing and did the counting and everything. And I did pretty good, and sent that off to the recruiter, and the recruiter said, "Okay, we'll send it up the chain of command." 6 months later, the recruiter called me and said, "You made it. You made it." So this was in 2008. He came down to my office at the university. He swore me in. And my mom was there. And I've told this story many, many times. And he said to my mom, she was in her 80s, and of course I was in my 50s, and he says, "Is it okay if Dan joins the Army?"
Got to get parental consent.
Yeah. And my mom says, "Well, sure, only if he doesn't have to go to war and doesn't have to play with guns." And so my recruiter said, "No problem. Just send a letter to General Orr, and everything will be
Tell him what you think.
everything will be just fine." So I raised my hand, took the oath of office, and I became Lieutenant Dan, just like that. And it was, since that time, it's just been an incredibly great ride. I'm very happy that I did that I made that decision, and it's all been positive ever since.
Were you the oldest Iowan to ever join, or just one of them? Because I've heard it both ways.
I've heard that I'm the oldest to join outside wartime.
Okay.
So there were probably people older in World War II or the Civil War, but I was pretty much up there.
Sure. And you were 50.
57 when I took the oath of office, 60 when I deployed to Afghanistan.
Well, age is just a number.
That's right. And all the members of my company, of course, were kids. They were just as young as my kids, so I called them kids. And they'd all come up to me and they'd say, "Oh, I hate to run. Oh, I don't like running." And I'd laugh at them and say, "You better keep up with me because I'm not waiting."
Yeah.
And I didn't wait, and I could beat them all. And it always astonished me that I could do that. And I'd say to them, "Didn't you see that commercial about being Army strong? What part of that didn't you understand?" And they just hated to run, but they were good at their jobs.
So you joined the Iowa Army National
That's
Guard,
right.
And so then you then had to go to basic training.
That's
yes?
right. Yes, I did.
So was it? We did you go to commissioned officer training, or was it
Yeah.
basic officer training, or what was it exactly?
Let me think about this. It was OBLC, which is probably basic officer training. It was down at Fort Sam Houston
Okay.
in San Antonio. And to me, it was a picnic, because we were doing things that I hoped we would do. get up in the morning, do PT. Well, I like to exercise. This is no big deal. Go for a run. Okay. The part that I didn't like so much that I scammed my way out of was combatives.
Okay.
I didn't like to wrestle. And so for people who supposedly were weak on PT, you could go to PT or go to combatives. Well, I just went to PT.
To PT, yeah.
And they weren't keeping track, so they didn't know that I was fine in physical shape, but I just didn't like to do combatives.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and then we got to do things that were I'd never done before, like shoot a rifle.
Mm-hmm.
I had never shot a rifle before. My dad wasn't a hunter.
Never shot a gun before training.
That's right, never. And so we're out on the rifle range, and I knew that you pointed the pointy end towards the target.
Right.
I knew that much, but I didn't know how to properly hold the weapon. I didn't know, okay, does it go against your shoulder and then your cheek's on the stock or any of those kinds of things. I wasn't quite clear on that. And then the civilian was helping me do something called zeroing in the rifle, which means you adjust the sights so that if you're doing everything right, you hit the target where you're supposed to,
mm-hmm.
and all of your shots are in a small grouping an inch or two apart. Well, he kept monkeying around with my sights, and I kept saying, hey, why don't you show me how to hold it correctly first, and then we'll monkey with the sights.
Yeah.
Eventually, I qualified and did okay. And it was the same thing with the pistol. I'd never shot a pistol before either. And same kind of thing. Once I got the hang of it, I did okay. In fact, I started to like pistols,
mm-hmm.
and now I have a couple. Here I am, 1968 long-haired hippie who's out buying guns. So.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, you had to be taught how to use them. How long was the basic training that you went through?
4 weeks.
Okay.
4 weeks.
Okay. Different abbreviations in different services. I had to go through what was called COT, Commissioned Officer Training, and it was also 4 weeks. We didn't have any social workers, but it was chaplains, doctors, and there was one lawyer. But if there were more lawyers, they would have been in that group. Is that kind of who you were in with?
Yeah, it was doctors, nurses, dentists, anybody.
That's right. There were
anybody in the health field.
Right.
Heads up, be careful of this cable.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was all health professionals, some of whom were literal thinkers. Here's an example of a literal thinker. We're doing land navigation, which means that you're given a compass and a map, and you have to find 3 points on the map. Before they sent us off to do this, they said, if you come to a barbed wire fence, that's the boundary. Do not climb under the fence because that's the boundary. Well, the literal thinkers in the group said to themselves, they didn't say anything about crawling over the fence.
Going over it.
They only said don't go under the fence. So they took that to mean that going over was okay. So we had a few people go over the fence who got lost.
Oh, no.
And so that meant that they were out wandering around near San Antonio, Texas, out in this Army training ground in the middle of the night. They woke us all up to do a head count, and the count never quite came out right.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they found them, but it was not without us all having to be woke up in the middle of the night to do a head count. So the moral of the story is, don't climb over or under the fence.
That's right.
This is the boundary.
Right. Don't cut the fence and walk through it.
That's right.
All these things. So I went to commissioned officer training. It was 4 weeks long. It was doctors, chaplains, dentists, so forth. We didn't get to do weapons training. It was mostly, so you talked about there were parts of it that you didn't like. For me, I didn't mind the PT. And yes, for those of you that are thinking he was Air Force, all they had to do was sit on a bike. That's not what happened. We had to run and do push-ups and sit-ups as well. But what we did was we mostly sat in class. Okay. And we called it death by PowerPoint.
Yes.
And it was just hour after hour after hour of lecture. And I would have rather been out doing drills. I actually loved drilling. I'd been in marching band. And so I got a reputation because the drill sergeants, for those of you that don't understand, we outrank the drill sergeants. So, because if you're on commissioned officer training, you, just like Dan said, so I raised my hand and I was a lieutenant. So the drill sergeants, they yelled at us, but they didn't yell at us the way you're all thinking. So the whole like Full Metal Jacket with the guy in your face screaming at you, like that, I don't know if that happened to you guys. That didn't happen to us.
No.
It always takes the bite out of it when your drill sergeant yells at you and calls you sir. It takes the bite out of it a little bit. But I got a reputation because I was so gung-ho and so happy to be there. They'd take us to the obstacle courses, and people would kind of half-ass their way through it. These are people that are doing it for a scholarship. So they're medical students, they're whatever, and they're kind of like, oh, they're kind of whatever. And so the drill sergeants would start yelling, and inevitably it was like, well, Adam's gonna do it, whatever. And so I would just scream like a banshee and go like climbing over the things, and you could just see them trying not to laugh because I was so happy to be there. Did they tear gas you guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
they'd give you your mask and they'd put you in the little shed.
Yeah.
Light the gas off. Yeah.
Yeah,
Did they take your mask off?
Oh yeah. It's a real confidence builder, and that's the whole idea. And to get out, they ask you had to say your name or
That's right.
something like that.
Take your mask off and look them in the eye, and
and you don't realize how hard that is until you do it. Our first day, our first lecture, first words were, "You're a soldier first, and whatever profession you are is second, but you're a soldier first."
Yeah.
Okay, and then we did a lot of, learned a lot of soldier skills, how to take apart a radio and put it back together, and of course how to take apart our weapons and clean them, things like that.
See, you got to do way more cool military shit than I did. Like again, ours was there. It was a lot of leadership, and there was just a lot of class. It's history of the Air Force. Air Force came out of the Army in 1947. The Army Air Corps became the United States Air Force, and there was a lot of that. Like you guys were doing cooler stuff. I remember. With the gas mask thing, there were two things I learned. So you learned about the fence stuff. I learned two things that night. My gas mask worked really well, and I got really cocky because I could feel it burning on the back of my neck.
Absolutely.
But I thought to myself, it's so easy with this mask on. How hard could it be? Took the mask off, and of course my eyeballs lit on fire. And the guy that, because he had to wait for him to ask for you to say your name, and he stood there and he stared at me and stared at me and stared at me, and I thought, oh, you son of a bitch. And he waited and waited, but there was that. And then the other part that would have been really smart was that when you've had tear gas around you, wash your clothes before you wear them again. So I had 3 uniforms and I rotated them. And I didn't always wash them because we were in class a lot of the day. It wasn't like we were out in the dirt all the time. So I put my uniform away, and a day or so later, put the uniform back on, and it was right in the middle of running. I started to sweat. All of a sudden, my eyes started to burn like a son of a bitch. And it was like, what's going on with this must have been the uniform I wore. But I was stuck. I couldn't get back to the dorm until later. So if any of you ever have that happen to you, be sure to wash your clothes.
Yeah, and once you get out of the tear gas room, it's quite amazing to watch everybody else come out because you lose all control of your nose.
Yes.
And so it gets very snotty very quickly.
It's interesting.
And you watch all these people and you're crying. That's why I call it tear gas, of course. And and so don't rub your eyes because that'll make it worse. And so
live fire drills was the other thing I remember when you have to crawl under the barbed wire. And they're shooting over your head. It was pretty far over our head. We were in that. But there's still there's something about, those are bullets. You're halfway through, you get this realization. You're like, wait, that's a bullet.
So we didn't get to do that. So, they
So-
didn't shoot at us. And
Because in the Air Force, we're so
Well, yeah,
hardcore.
guys, but all in all, the people that are training, they wanted us to pass because we were all healthcare professionals and they
Right.
needed us. So they want us to pass. So that, they were very helpful when you had questions, and, that wasn't bad at all.
Yeah. If a young person came to you and said they were thinking about either a career in the military or going into the military, what would your advice be?
Well, I'd say do it. Look at the jobs. Think about what job you might want to have that could translate into a civilian job. And there are many of them out there. Even infantry jobs can transfer into the civilian world if you know how to write a resume. Think about this. We trust 18-year-olds with multi-million-dollar Army vehicles. Multi-million-dollar Army vehicles. And we trust them with the other 4 or 5 people in that vehicle.
Right.
So here we're developing leadership skills in an 18 or 19-year-old. You know, would you give an 18-year-old the key to your car? You'd think about it.
Yeah.
So we're giving these young people the keys to this multi-million-dollar vehicle, and we're telling, hey, go out and do your job. And so
Right.
you get those are kind of skills that transfer into the civilian world, plus the leadership skills, plus the communication skills. You just need to know, how do you put that into your resume? You don't need to write about, I can shoot a gun. That's a given. But the leadership skills, the planning skills, all those are the kind of things that companies want.
Can't buy a beer, but multi-million-dollar vehicles and big, powerful weapons and so forth. I think that one of the things that I often say to people is a couple things. Especially if school is not your thing, I think the enlist. Dan and I are sitting here. You know, we're a couple officers, and the enlist like to make fun of officers for not doing anything, and it's one of those things where it's different on both sides. But the military is built on the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, which means the sergeants or the petty officers or my Marine ranks are always with the corporals and the sergeants and so forth. So I think the enlist is a great thing to do, especially if school's not really your thing. If school is more of your thing, I would encourage anybody, and I do in my office, to consider ROTC or to get your bachelor's degree and to try to get into the officer corps the way that Dan and I are talking about, just because life is a little bit nicer in the officer corps, and the training is different in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that I noticed and see what you have to say is that I didn't know what to expect going into officer training, but it wasn't as much about break us down and get us to be sort of the order followers that the enlisters are supposed to be, because we were supposed to be the leaders. We were supposed to be the ones, so that they encouraged us. I keep explaining myself because I don't want to offend anybody. I have respect for anybody who raises their hand and goes out to do military stuff. But there was a difference between people say, this was want to break you down and have you follow whatever. Not in the officer corps.
No.
They encouraged us to think for ourselves. There's a level of which orders have to be followed, but it was not the break you down thing that you see in Full Metal Jacket.
That's right. And movies are a good way to look at leadership and decide, what kind of leader do I want to be? Because there's some pretty decent movies out there in terms of leadership.
What are some of the ones that you like?
Well, you can watch Patton, and you can say, Patton is, maybe he wasn't the guy that I want to follow. He had his way of doing things, and it was like Bobby Knight, basketball
That's
coach.
Right.
Do I want my kids to play for Bobby Knight? He gets good results, but maybe his method isn't something that I would do. Now, the leader that I like is Hal Moore. We were soldiers once and young. Now, Hal Moore was an Olympic athlete. And when he was in Norway, he said to his kids, you're going to go to Norwegian school. You're going to learn everything about Norway. You're going to learn to speak the language. And so he was more of a leader who led by example rather than, blood and guts kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that would be 2 examples.
Yeah.
But you can look at those 2 and pick out, what can I learn from both of these people? And we know it's Hollywood, and so
Right.
it's not
liberties will be taken.
Yeah, it's not
and so
necessarily true, but it can give you some ideas of what kind of leader do I want to be. And in the modern days, we look at, just in Army side, you can look at Stan McChrystal
Mm-hmm.
is an example, and what's the admiral's name now? That's Make Your Bed, Admiral.
Cooper will try to find something for us on on Google. I don't. General Jumper was the Air Force Chief of Staff when I was in. Patton was an interesting cat. He believed in reincarnation and all kinds of interesting things. Patton was. Oh, there you go.
Bill McRaven.
Yeah, there you go. See, you didn't even look, did you?
No.
You just thought of it as you brought it up. So that was good. Patton was an interesting cat. I know you and I talked about this because I remember watching Hacksaw Ridge, and I instantly. So we were still living in this house, and I was sitting on a couch that was about where Cooper is sitting, and I wasn't even done with it, and I was sending you Facebook emails going, "Hey, have you seen this movie?
Right.
That movie. Describe that movie. So anyone listening who hasn't seen it, go see Hacksaw Ridge. Be ready for it. If war movies aren't your thing, but it's a wonderful story. Tell us the story in brief. Just
All right. Hacksaw Ridge is a story of a soldier who didn't believe in war, wouldn't carry a gun, but was able to find a job that fit him, which was to be a medic. And so he had to jump through a lot of hoops to be a medic, and was relieved to not have to carry a weapon. And he turned out, this was in the South Pacific, and he was a fantastic hero. The things that he did under the most terrible circumstances you could ever imagine. This guy was the real deal.
Yeah. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, I think.
Yes.
So conscientious objector, easily could have not served because of his objector status. They really highlight in the movie, they tried to get him kicked out for like psychiatric reasons, like he was obviously crazy. He won't. He believes that God, whatever else. And the actor who played him is the guy he was in the Facebook movie, and he was one of the million Spider-Mans, because I've lost count. There've been so many frickin' Spider-Mans, but I thought he did a very good job. And that movie ends with one of my favorite things that they do when it's based on a real story, because you hear the dialogue and you think to yourself, well, did some guy in Hollywood write that? And then in the end, there's an interview with the actual guy, and he starts talking about some of the things he was saying when he was rescuing the people, and it's literally the word-for-word dialogue the guy was using, like God, just one more, and this and that. It's a magnificent story. I was really, there are some that are brutal in their reality, like Lone Survivor. I almost couldn't watch Lone Survivor. It was so real. And I wasn't in Afghanistan, which we're going to get to in a minute because you were. But yeah, so and here really quick, I want to bring him in too, because we're going to talk about his brother for a minute. But I mean, what are there other war movies that you think are particularly good? You might recommend to people?
Oh, I already said We Were Soldiers Once and Young. That's one I can watch over and over again. Band of Brothers.
Oh,
That
Band
series,
of Brothers was so good.
I can watch.
Oh my
and I
God.
have watched that.
Yeah,
I
Easy
don't know
Company.
how many times I've seen that, and I like that one a lot.
And they do the same thing. The real people are part of the interviews. To make the story as easy as I can without describing the hoops of divided and divorced and remarried families. My step grandfather he fought in the jungles in Japan in in World War II. My father tried to get him to watch Band of Brothers, and it started giving him PTSD flashbacks. So again, for ease of the conversation, my step grandmother said to my father, please stop recording them and giving them to him. That's an interesting story. Jewel Nelson, again, my step grandfather, he was charged with going out to tell the embedded Japanese soldiers they had surrendered. Well, would you believe an American soldier who's going, hey guys, come on out. I promise I won't kill you because your guys just surrendered. And so the war was actually technically over, and he got struck in the back of the head with a machete, and it went halfway through, and they left him for dead. And so he didn't die, and he could no sense of smell his whole life, and he
Sure.
had big, thick hearing aids. But because of what he got from the military, he put himself through chiropractic school. Interesting story with that. But I mean, so sort of like your so I've met the Yellens in Fairfield, but it's like, again, the war was actually over, and
Yeah.
we lost more people because the Japanese weren't coming out, man.
No.
They had a lot of honor in kind of what they were doing. Those guys, they weren't going to give up. So
That's right.
So Cooper, your brother is in the Army, yes?
Yep, him and my sister-in-law, both of them.
Right. And so he's deployed at least once, right?
Twice. He just got back from his second, and my sister-in-law just got back from her first.
And that was to Iraq?
Kuwait.
To Kuwait.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mentioned to Dan, I said, he's right there in the middle. I can't remember what the name of the country is, and he's the one that pulled it out before I even did.
Yeah. So I mean, we've talked about your brother before, and he's somebody that I really want to meet. I'd like to have on the show at some point. I mean, I don't hate to have you speak for him too much, but I'm sure you know, like, what were some of his motivations for going in, and how's he liking it, and that kind of stuff?
Well, he went the ROTC route, and he is a fan. I don't know if he's a fan of school, but he excelled in school, so school came more naturally to him. He's got a bigger and better brain and processor than I do myself. So I think he originally went for engineering, and then he kind of realized, I think he didn't think that was going to be the career path he wanted to go, but ROTC is the route that he went. So now he's a second lieutenant, I believe. Went to airsoft school, and I think his main motivation was to get his schooling paid for, and then have valuable military experience under his belt.
Yeah. The second lieutenant has what's called the butter bar. So it's the little gold one that looks like that. So if there's ever a picture and you can see what's on his shoulder, if it's a silver bar, it's a first lieutenant. And then 2 bars, that's the captain.
Yeah,
that's him.
There's so much jargon, and it varies so much between branches
Yes.
and whatnot that I've given up on trying to keep track.
Well, that's right, and you're absolutely right. Each service has its own vocabulary. Okay, so you kind of have to learn. I'll give you an example. In the Army, we go to the latrine. The Marines and the Navy go to the head. Now, the Air Force goes to the bathroom.
Right. Right. So there's I got to spend a bunch of time with the Army. The Army still very much shepherds the Air Force in some ways. Like, there's only one Air Force hospital, so I got to do my hospital training with the Army at Fort Lewis in Washington, in Tacoma at Madigan Army Medical Center. That was where I spent a bunch of time, and so the Army's been very generous. I've been out of the service for a while now. It's been a decade or so, but they were very generous. So, but it is different, and the Air Force likes to get made fun of by the other services for basically being weak. The joke I heard the most common was, I thought about joining the Air Force, then I realized I wanted to be in the military. That was the most common joke I heard. And so, but the thing that I learned quickly is that all the other services make fun of us for being weak, and we make fun of them for being stupid. So it was like, I don't know which is better or not. The Army and the Marines. So it was the Marines used to say Army stands for ain't ready to be Marines yet, and then the Army used to say the Marine stands for Moron Army Rejects in Naval something. And for the life of me, I can never remember what the E stood for. But that was the thing. But I always tell people about the military. It's a lot like brothers and I'll add sisters. It's not like siblings. When you're home, you beat up on each other, you make fun of each other. It's playful, and sometimes it can cross the line in terms of ribbing. But man, when you got somebody else picking on you, so in the schoolyard, when someone's picking on your brother, all that I hate my little brother stuff goes away because you're family. And when you got someone else coming at you, the coalition force comes out in you, and the green or the blue or the white or the whatever the Marines, they just think they're better than all of us. But it all kind of goes away, and that leads us beautifully into, you went not only to on deployment. I mean, you went to war.
Yeah.
So your mother's 2 things were no guns and no war, and damn it, Dan, if you didn't break both of them.
I know.
So tell us all about your deployment and what going to war was like.
Yeah, to go to war, you go through a lot of training beforehand. So it's not like you just get on a plane one day in Cedar Rapids and fly to Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. In between there, you go to Camp Shelby in Mississippi, where you start practicing the skills that you're going to need when you get to Afghanistan. And then to ratchet it up a little bit more, you go to Fort Irwin in California, which is in the middle of the Mojave Desert. At Fort Irwin, they have built villages to simulate Iraqi villages and Afghani villages, and then they hire people to play those roles as Afghanis or Iraqis, whatever it may take. And then they bring in the Hollywood stunt people who set off explosions, who can make an arm look like it's a fresh amputation, and can do all kinds of things to bring a real simulation into that role play. And so in the medical unit, they would bring in amputees, former military, make their stump look like it had just been blown up, and then our people in the medical company would go to work and treat them. And they would do something called a mass casualty event, where they would bring in not just one amputee, but 10 or 15, and so you would have the chaos.
All hit the same time.
All hit at the same time, and so all that was to put you under that pressure situation, so that if it ever happened, you would have had that experience. Now, for me, I went to work right away because soldiers would come to me who'd been deployed before, and they'd say things like, I don't know that I can do this. It's too real, and I don't want to let my guys down. I'm worried that I'm going to crack under the pressure here in the Mojave Desert, and I don't want to let my guys down. They weren't trying to get out of deploying. They were worried about their guys, and that was across the board. I never had anybody come to me and say, I got to get out of this place. I can't handle it. It was always put in the context of, I'm worried about my guys, that I'm going to do something wrong. So from there at Camp Shelby, we went back to Mississippi for a while and then flew into Afghanistan to Bagram Air Base. Now when you fly into Bagram, it's in a valley surrounded by mountains. And what you notice first is it's full of smog. You can't see anything. And so when you land, one of the things that went through my mind was, okay, are these Air Force guys going to land like a United flight, or are they going to do a combat landing, which means you just sort of drop out of the sky and land that way? Well, they did a United landing. It was nice and smooth and no bumping around, but they don't mess around getting you off the plane, because a plane's a big target. Big target, and that's what the insurgents want to do, is hit a big target. So we get off the plane and we get situated and set off to our housing and kind of get calmed down. But the time difference, I can't remember, but it was huge, and so we were all jet lagged.
Mm-hmm.
So about the second or third day there, my roommates and I, we were living in a shipping container, which is what most people lived in over there. They pile up shipping containers, divide them into half, and then divide them into half again. So you get a quarter of a shipping container for about 6 guys. So think of a jail cell. And it was probably about the size of a jail cell, maybe a little bit smaller. But it's nice. It's got electricity. It's got air conditioning.
But it's nice.
It's nice.
It's smaller 6 of us, we're good buddies after a couple days, because,
Yeah, we were about 300 meters from the flight line. So all night long and all day long, you could hear the Air Force doing their thing.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon, if you paid attention, you knew the difference in the sound of the motors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a big jet, that's a fighter jet. Particularly with the fighters, they would go off 2 at a time. It'd be, the lead and their wingman. So, okay, and the other thing you notice is when the fighters went off, they'd go off with bombs on their wings, and when they came home, for whatever reason, they did not have any bombs on their wings. And so you'd think to yourself, oh, Mr. Taliban, you had a bad day, didn't you? And then, you put things in perspective. The Taliban are living in caves, and we're living in shipping containers with electricity and internet and air conditioning, warm food. And think, hey, no way you're going to beat us. We got all this stuff going for us. We have the capability of building a forward operating base in less than 24 hours. It's all put together on containers, and they could just say, oh, we're going to turn Kinnick Stadium into a forward operating base. And they could do it easily. So we're there about 24, 48 hours, and the sirens go off. Remember in MASH, they used to have radar talk on the loudspeaker?
Yeah.
In Army terms, that's the big voice. The big voice would go, the sirens would go off, and the big voice would come on, and it would say, incoming, shelter in place. So we're there, third or fourth day, the sirens go off, the big voice comes on, incoming, shelter in place, and we didn't know what the hell to do. So we improvised. It pissed us off because we were watching movies, and you're thinking, hey, couldn't you guys wait till the movie was over?
Right. It's so inconvenient.
Yeah.
With us in this base in your country to shoot rockets at us. Why
Yeah.
couldn't you at least waited until it was time to
wait till intermission or something.
Wait till intermission.
But in the beginning, you have this concept of distance. Okay, picture yourself living at the Cedar Rapids Airport, and your container is where the terminal is, and a rocket lands on the far end of the western runway. You might hear the boom, you might not. But then you begin to think to yourself, oh, that was pretty darn close.
Mm-hmm.
Then after a while, if you're living in your little shipping container and you hear a whoosh and then a boom, then you begin to say, oh, maybe I better put on my helmet and my flat vest, because that was a little bit too close for comfort. Then if you hear a boom and a whoosh, you say, good deal, that's our artillery answering back.
Mm-hmm.
So whoosh boom is bad, boom whoosh is good. Too easy to remember those things.
There you go.
But my job was, once we got into the country, I went out to one of the FOBs to live. And I was responsible for mental health care at 4 or 5 other FOBs. And so every Monday, I'd get on the helicopter and fly over to the FOB I was scheduled to be at, and had a deal worked out with the medics at that FOB. I'm coming, get some guys lined up for me, and we'll help them out.
So this is the forward operating base, the FOB, and so and then you were doing therapy with the guys. Is that kind of,
That's right.
Again? I don't want you to compromise anything,
exactly.
but give us an idea of like what was some normal complaints or what you were doing on a normal.
Well, normal
day,
complaints would be, I checked my bank account and all my money's gone.
Oh, my wife took off.
My wife took off with all my money, decided she needed new furniture and a new car, and now my bank account is empty. Or my wife, I'm sorry to pick on wives, my wife sent pictures of herself to my buddy, and these are pictures that shouldn't be shared.
Shouldn't have been sent to the buddy. Yeah.
That was one example. Another example would be was a deal with the medics. Somebody would go into the medic and say, I'm not sleeping. Well, there are a lot of reasons he couldn't sleep at night, including the bad guys would wait till the middle of the night to rocket us, and they'd wake you up. And, once you woke up in the middle of the night, there were certain things you had to do. There were rally points you had to go to. Mm-hmm. So they did that just for harassment. They didn't often hit anything, but they knew if they woke us up, we had to go someplace. So sleep was a big issue. So then we had a protocol that we would use to discuss why you didn't sleep. And it wasn't necessarily the bad guys rocking us in the middle of the night. So we would ask, okay, how much caffeine are you drinking during a day? Because a lot of people would drink those heavily caffeinated drinks. We all know what they are. When did you have your last one? Oh, I had it about 8 o'clock. When did you want to go to bed? Oh, I wanted to go to bed at 10 o'clock. Well, let's put this in perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe that caffeine was still working on you. Stop those energy drinks a little bit earlier, and that might help. Common sense. And then we talk about, all right, are you smoking? All right, same idea. Nicotine has some things in it that will keep
Right.
you
It can be
awake.
like a stimulating type effect, right? Yeah.
So, hey, same time you cut back on the caffeine, cut back on smoking. Third thing that a lot of people don't know about, your computer gives off a blue light. That blue light is translated by your brain to mean daylight.
Mm-hmm.
If it's daylight, you should stay awake. So, turn your computer off a little bit earlier at night. Stop the caffeine, stop the smoking, and see if that helps.
Sleep hygiene, we call that.
Sleep hygiene. It's very simple. Now, try that out for a while. If it doesn't work, you can go back to the medics, and they'll talk to you about what medication you might take to help you sleep. But that was the number one issue was sleep.
Yeah.
It's just hard to turn that off at night because you always had to be on guard for if something bad came down.
Yeah.
But that was the number one thing that we talked about.
Okay. And something happened at one of the bases that you were assigned to,
Right.
and obviously I would like people to listen to it here on this channel. But there's a video that Dan gave a talk for the Des Moines Register for the interesting people of Iowa. Or
Yes, the Des Moines Register Storytellers
thing, and it's in all the years you and I sat around conference tables at the U and told lies to each other about how great we were as soldiers. I somehow missed that story, and it was chilling to me to hear it when I prepared for the interview last week. We had to cancel, unfortunately. I can't wait to, even though I know what you're going to say, I'm like budding with anticipation to hear you tell it live. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, one of the things that we did they're called critical incident debriefings. When something bad happened, I would go and my assistant would go and we would meet with the soldiers who were in that incident. I'll tell a funny one first before I talk about a serious one. We went out to a forward operating base one day because not a Humvee, but one of the big trucks got blown up. Nobody was hurt, but our job was to debrief the survivors of the truck. So we started talking. I talked to the driver. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, we hit an IED, and it blew the truck up about 10 feet in the air, and it landed on its side. We were all okay. Next guy, well, what happened? Well, we hit an IED. The truck blew about 20 feet in the air, and it rolled over, but we're all okay. So you can see where this is going. The next guy, God, we must have went 40 feet in the air. We did a 360, and we came down, and everybody was okay. So we talked to those guys. Everybody was okay. But it was like a fish story. The more you went into it, the bigger the fish got. So in April of 2011, there was 13 days that were terrible. On a Saturday morning at a FOB named Gambari, early in the morning, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock, there's a general staff meeting with Afghani soldiers and U.S. soldiers. So in a conference room, a fellow dressed in an Afghani uniform walked into the conference room, said Allah Akbar, blew himself up. He had on a suicide vest and blew himself up. And I learned about that explosion maybe an hour or two after it had happened. So they called me into the operations center, and there are televisions in there that had a live feed from where this had happened at Gambari. And you could see outside of this building blast patterns where the explosion would happen. At that time, I didn't know, because my company was there, my medical company was there. I didn't know if any of my friends had been hurt or not. And I was told, you need to get down there as quickly as you can. Well, we had one of our soldiers at our FOB killed a couple days before, and we hadn't buried him yet. And so I said, I'll come as quick as I can, but we got to take business here at home first. So I get down there, And one of my friends, who's a physician assistant, had everything organized. And this is what I had to do. I had to debrief the soldiers in the room where the explosion took place. I debriefed the soldiers who ran towards the explosion, and I debriefed the medical people who treated the wounded. Mm. So let me start about the soldiers in the room. These were all 101st Airborne people, so they were regular Army. So this Afghani guy walks into the room. He looks pretty good, but he's kind of a sloppy soldier. He doesn't salute the officers when he walks in the room. And he doesn't have any socks on. Mm. Okay, so everybody, they're telling me, it was kind of odd, but, Afghanis being Afghanis, no socks, could have just been a sloppy soldier along with no salute. And they heard him say Allah Akbar, and the next thing they know, there was the boom. They weren't able to react fast enough to have done anything about it. And that was the thing that they were all lamenting. I wish I could have done something, but there wasn't. Yeah. Somebody did yell, "Get down," was with it enough to yell, "Get down." And so a lot of people did get down. Those who didn't were hurt or killed. Mm. And so when they reflected backwards, they try to put meaning to this whole thing. They think, although they don't know, that he didn't have socks on because he purified his feet before he went in to kill himself. Right. And so all of those people in the room were wounded. A lot of them were medics. And to a person, these medics said to me, "Yeah, I had my eardrums blown out and I had a lot of shrapnel wounds, but my first response was, hey, this guy over here is hurt worse than me," and they started treating the wounded. Mm-hmm. That was their first response. Even though they were hurt themselves, that was the first response. Now, people in the room who weren't medics, their first thought was, I better get outside and set up a protective barrier because this could just been the first stage of the attack. So they're going to set up a perimeter. So even though they were wounded, that's what they did. And to a person, they all similar stories. Somebody was hurt worse than me. I couldn't hear anything, but it didn't matter. I'm going to go treat the wounded. Mm. Then the people that ran towards the room. Okay, so picture yourself Saturday morning, you're getting your coffee and you hear an explosion. All right. Nothing unusual there because it could have been what we call a military controlled detonation, And they just didn't tell us this morning that we were going to do a controlled detonation, but they soon figured out, no, this was an explosion in our conference room. So they all ran towards the explosion. That was their first instinct, to run towards the explosion with no thought at all about being in danger. They ran towards the explosion. And so they started to evacuate the wounded. And they did. Now, the medics that morning, the medical clinic is just like any other family practice clinic on a Saturday morning. Lots of colds and sniffles and blisters and things like that. So they heard the explosion too, and like the people that ran towards the explosion thought, it's a controlled det, no worries, until the ambulances started coming in and started coming and coming and coming. Now, there wasn't a doctor. There was a physician's assistant, and she was there by herself with a bunch of medics. The second physician assistant was coming back to the FOB, and she was in a helicopter over the FOB, and she kept telling the pilots, you got to get me down there. You got to get me down there now. And they wouldn't land because,
no one knows what's going on. Yeah, I mean, the chopper could take a second hit,
So they didn't. So the physician assistant and all the medics. Now, the medics, you got to realize, these are all young people, 21, 22, even less. And they all went to work, just like the mass casualty event that we had practiced for. And I can imagine the kind of wounded that showed up that day. Clearly, there would have been shrapnel wounds. Clearly, there might have been catastrophic amputations. Clearly, there, lots and lots and lots of patients all at once. Mm-hmm. So when I talked to them, they told me how they figured out how to triage things and how they were going to fix things for the next event. Because they figured, hey, if it happened once, it could happen again. So one of the medics said to me, the biggest problem was finding what we needed. So on her own, she said, okay, I'm going to put the things we needed first at chest level on our shelves. The equipment we needed second, I'm going to put it my waist level. And the things we needed last, I'm going to put at my knee level. All on her own. No one told her to do that, but she reorganized supplies in a way that would make it easier the next time. Now, all the people that were brought in that morning for treatment lived with the exception of one person. And that person had, in medical terms, a condition incompatible with life, which meant that no matter what they would have done, that person was over. They kept that person alive long enough to be evacuated to a bigger medical facility outside the country. And the way I understand it, although I can't verify it, is they kept that person alive long enough so his family from America could come over and be there when he passed. But they were able to keep him alive that long.
It's an amazing testament to the indomitable will and the spirit of those involved, and especially because it's not like the person took a blast right outside of Harvard Hospital. I mean, this is the facilities, all those staffed were not state of the art, I'm sure.
That's
and
right.
and I mean, it just shows how quickly people were able to get there, and the ability to do their job under intense pressure.
That's right, and they did. And these were the kids. That's what I like to call them. The kids all stood up that day and did their jobs. I was very proud of every one of them. And one of the things I said in my storyteller speech was Des Moines, the kids grew up that day. Now, these kids have gone on to professional careers. They've finished their degrees, and some are now nurses, some are lawyers, and they put that training to good use to advance themselves. But to me, this particular incident is the incident that is stayed in my mind as the best piece of work that I did over there, was that critical incident debriefing. I did 4 or 5 altogether, but this is the one that really sticks in my mind, where we did the best work that we possibly could have done on that day under really hard circumstances. I wasn't confident going in there. Number one, the people in the room, none of those people knew me. They didn't know me. They didn't know me from anybody else, and they talked. I was able to get them to talk about what had happened. And my company, the people that I did knew, they of course they knew me, so they were more willing to talk. And the people that ran towards the explosion were all Iowans, and so they knew who I was, but they hadn't particularly had conversations with me before, and so that was April 2011.
Okay. And I then met you in 2012. When you got home, was there any PTSD symptoms, flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, any of the sort of classic signs for you, or did you pretty much get back into civilian life fairly easily?
I got back. The hardest part was my assignment changed at the hospital. I'd been on a unit with mostly psychiatric patients, or not psychiatric, but schizophrenic patients.
Okay.
And when I got back, I was moved to a unit which had mostly people with depression. So it was hard to keep that empathy level going. Even though I know, depression's a medical illness and all those kinds of things. And I catch myself thinking, you got nothing to be depressed about.
Right.
You didn't get shot at on the way to the cafeteria this morning. You didn't hear a bomb, rocket go over your bedroom last night.
Yeah.
So that transition was I had to have a lot of self-talk with myself. Okay, this is real. Depression is real. You can't tell them just to suck it up.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things about perspective, and I think every generation thinks that the next one is weak and entitled compared to those. But I think about the World War II generation, and then when their children, when the baby boomers kind of got to the age, and a lot of them weren't really into Vietnam, and there was a lot of anger, I think, because the country came together, and of course people would argue it was different. We were attacked by Japan versus in the Viet Cong, what happened with that. But I do think that it wouldn't have to even be war, but perspective of if you grow up. Our last guest, who we shot earlier this week, was talking about how he grew up in the ghetto. Basically, he's a black guy named Andre. He has a great clothing line called Humanize My Hoodie, and he goes around and gives a lot of talks about racism. And he was saying, if you grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in, your perspective of then what's a nice neighborhood is very different.
Sure.
Than somebody that grows up in a rich neighborhood, and they kind of think, well, my life sucks because I don't have the iPhone 11. Versus again, there's gangs or drug dealers on the corner. So it's quite a thing.
Yeah, and over there, your world shrinks. Your world shrinks down to that 3 or 4 square blocks from your bedroom to your office to the dining facility. That's your world, because you can't get in the car and drive anywhere. You can't go into the village. This is your world, so it becomes very compact.
Well, it's 7 days a week. It's not like you get a weekend where you say to the other people, "Hey, we're gonna stop. You should stop shooting at us for a couple days. We kind of need to just take a little breather here." How long were you in Afghanistan?
From November through July.
So
210 to 211.
Okay, so because I know sometimes the Army deployments are 12 months or 18 months or something like that.
That was in country. We left, for 2 or 3 months ahead of that to do the train up and.
Sure. I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about kind of some of the health things you went through, because that happened when I knew you as well, and I feel like this may not be true, and I want to lead you into this temptation, but it seems to me that when I knew you, that kind of led to a lot of this philosophical, spiritual change that I saw in you. But I would be remiss. Well, you're the first that I know of with you, the first military veteran we've talked to. I think there'll be people listening. Here's somebody who was actually in country, who grew up, like you said, in this time when America was on fire. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute.
Okay.
Do you think it was really justified after 9/11 to go into Afghanistan and in Iraq as well, when the people on the planes were largely from Saudi Arabia? Aren't we just picking on brown people or Muslims or so forth? Like, what's your take on the justifiability of kind of the conflict you were involved with and all that?
Yeah, I never gave it a lot of thought. It just seemed this was my Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. My Pearl Harbor. And being a social worker and knowing about 22 veterans a day killing themselves by suicide, this was my call to duty. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to do this job right, I'm going to put the uniform on. Because if I'm talking to a veteran and I've never been in the military, I may not have as much credibility as I would if I'd put the uniform on and I could say, yeah, I remember that time we went to the tear gas chamber.
Yeah.
Or, and so I thought it was something that I needed to do in order to fulfill my goal of doing something about veteran suicide.
Yeah.
Okay, so whether it's justified or not, I don't know. We got Osama while I was over there. So, we maybe achieved.
I guess that's what I was thinking. I was in medical school, so I would have been right about that time.
Yeah. So, so I can't take any credit for getting Osama, but I was there.
And I think you bring up a point that I got asked a couple of times what I thought about it, because I would say I'm a left-leaning type person, and I said, my job is to serve the soldiers, the airmen, and the sailors and the Marines. It's way above my pay grade to decide where are we going and what are we doing. And that's basically what I just heard you say.
Yeah.
You know, I was there to serve the people, and this was my Pearl Harbor, and I was going to serve in some way. And definitely, so amongst the residents that were working at the VA when I was there, A, I volunteered to be at the VA as often as I could be. And B, I think the veterans were respectably polite to my classmates that weren't veterans, but I would say that I had a lot more street cred with a lot of those guys in the clinic that you and I both worked with, because you were doing the dog project by then. But
yeah, and you can remember my job with the dog research study was to sit in the lobby to try to recruit veterans to sign up for a research study. It was incredible. I would just sit out there and listen. And these guys would open up and just begin to tell me all kinds of great stories.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal. Here we are sitting in the lobby, and we're full of other veterans, and we all kind of look at each other and smile and wink, and you just hear these stories, and it was super.
Yeah, the military guys telling stories is great. I would get asked all the time in the beginning of the conversation, "Are you a veteran?" Do you remember Z? So I had a classmate, and his name was actually Muhammad Ali, but he went by his middle name, which was Zahir. Z, and if he ever listens to it, I don't think he'd mind me saying it. Z is definitely a Muslim, and he's Middle Eastern looking, but he's from Chicago. And he caught a lot of shit when we were at the VA. And every now and then one of the veterans would say to me, "Well, I just told that guy he should go back to where he came from." And I always be like, "You mean Chicago?" And they'd go, "No, I mean where he's really from." And it's like, "You mean Texas?" I mean, because he was about as American as all of us, and he had these really cute kids. But you were talking about every service has their own language. One of the things that I would often say to the veterans, especially none of them wanted to be there. They felt like they were admitting weakness, and I would always say to them, "Here's some military language for you. Take a breath. We have all the times that we need. There ain't no squints or jodies in this room." All right. And I don't know, as a non-military, you ever heard of those expressions before? Do you want to define them, or you want me to define them?
Well, you go ahead.
So Jody, as far as I know, Jody comes out of the Vietnam era. And so if you go off to war and a civilian takes care of your woman for you, that guy is a Jody. All right. And then Squint was something that Dr. Alden, who's my hero, who Dr. Alden has agreed to come on the show. It's just his schedule is tough. But I'm going to get Jeff on here at some point. Jeff was very much my mentor in the VA. I will very arrogantly say that I think I'm the second best psychiatrist in Iowa to treat PTSD. And I say that, again, I think I'm serious, and part of it is because I trained with Jeff Alden. And
sure.
But anyway, he said to me he didn't know what Squint was. So Dan and I technically are civilians, and just like you are, say you're a civilian, but you also could call Dan or myself a veteran. A Squint is somebody who's a civilian that never served. So in military offices, what I didn't realize till I was in the service is that they hire civilians to work on the base. So like you'd hear people talk about, they'd say, "Hey, who all works in your office?" And they'd go, "Well, there's the old man," which that means the colonel or the lieutenant colonel. "There's the old man, there's the lieutenant or the captain, 3 NCOs, 2 veterans, and 2 squints." So civilians that never served. So that was but there's a great movie with Danny DeVito called Renaissance Man. If you've never seen it, it's worth seeing. But right in the beginning, he goes onto the military base to teach an English class, and he asks the guy where he's going, and the guy has this big long string of things. He goes, "Well, you go past HQ, and then the BOQ, and the thus and so." He has this big string of abbreviations, and Danny DeVito says to him, "Can I buy a vowel?" It's one of the great
that's one of the
lines,
fun things about military language is it changes all the time. So I was a semi-pogue.
Yeah.
Okay, a semi-pogue. A pogue is a person who never goes outside the wire. Well, I went outside the wire, but I didn't have to go in a truck. I always took the helicopter, so I had a good life. When I wanted to go to another fob, I'd just go over to the helicopter terminal and I'd say, "Sergeant, put me on the manifest for tomorrow. Here's where I want to go." And he'd say, "Yes, sir. Here's the show time." And get in the helicopter, have my little camera out. I'm a combat tourist. I'm taking pictures all the way to the next fob, which only took 15, 20 minutes. If you went by truck, we're talking 2-3 hours. And so
Now, he gave the nice definition of pogue as beginning with person. That's you can imagine what other P word gets thrown in there. Remp was another one that the Army used that the Air Force didn't use a lot, but that was a rear echelon MF. It's the way that it was spelled. I still remember my primary trainer when I was at the Army base was a civilian, and I dropped FUBAR into a conversation, and she asked me to define it, and I said, "What stands for fouled up beyond all recognition?" And she came over the top of me, and she went, "LT, I do not think that it stands for fouled up." And I said, "Well, ma'am, it's that's sort of what it is." But yeah, we could sit here and tell military stories all day. I mean, so as much as you want to share, you sort of dropped it in at the beginning of the conversation, but at the end of the time that I knew you at the hospital, before you then transitioned into working with the dog thing, you had some health concerns come up that really seemed to me, at least, like it really changed your life. So as much as you want to share, tell us about that.
Well, before my career in the National Guard was over, I started having seizures. And I should say they didn't happen very frequently. The most frequent I had them was every 6 months. So the neurologist and I were talking about, okay, we want to get this under control, and so started some anti-seizure medication. But it was hard to see if it was working because every 6 months, to me, that was no big deal, with the exception was that you couldn't drive for 6 months. So I get to drive for 6 months, and then I'd be off for 6 months. And then at about the same time, we discovered I had a glioma, which they always called it a glioma, which I later found out was a brain tumor, a cancer. But the docs at the U never used the word cancer. They always said glioma. And we discovered that maybe the glioma was part of the reason that I was having seizures. All right, so the right thing to do was let's get it out of there. Let's, sharpen up your knife and let's get it out. And so I did that. And, that surgery went well. I've had follow-up MRIs every 6 months since then, and everything looks good. There's no regrowth, so everything is fine. And then we finally got me on the right medications for the seizures. So now it'll be it's almost 3 years since I've had my last seizure.
That's great.
So we're in good shape there. The trouble with the seizures was it made me non-deployable.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant the Army said, okay, we'll either give you a medical discharge or you can fight it. And I thought, well, I've achieved all my goals. I've deployed, I got in, and so, all right, just go ahead and discharge me. Now, I somewhat regret that because I miss it. I miss my friends, and, they won't let me back in now because I'm a little bit older than I was then. Just a little bit. But I do miss my friends. But the good news is health-wise, everything's going well now.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a story that I've never told anybody. And I don't know how much of this you remember, but I saw you not long after you had surgery, and you remembered who I was, but you remembered none of what we had talked about. You didn't remember that I was a veteran. You didn't remember that we had talked about our stuff with the war. And I did. I hope I concealed my face well. And I remember shaking your hand and sort of we sort of talked about it. I went back to the resident room and I cried. Oh. Because again, part of it's the social work thing. Part of it's just, I don't know, we're guys, and so it reminded me of my dad a little bit. He died of cancer. He died of pancreatic cancer. It wasn't the same thing, but it's one of those things you hear about, but when it happens to somebody you really care about, it was striking to me. So that's why when you came back to the clinic, then and I got to start seeing you again, you knew everything about we had talked about and so forth, and it was it did my heart good. Not to make it all about me, but I mean, it was, you've always been someone I've looked up to, and I'm really glad to hear it's been that many years and so forth.
There's a lot of memories that are gone from that summer. A a lot of times now I'll have facial recognition but no name.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I ask myself questions about, all right, is this just a matter of normal aging, or is it something relating to having part of your brain cut out? You know, and you don't know those answers.
Sure. Could be a little bit of both.
It could be,
you
yeah.
know. But so then it was around that time, as you were sort of coming out of it, that all of a sudden you started sharing books with me, and I still have a couple books that you gave me throughout the years. And I mean, was it something like a brush with death? Was it do you feel like something? This is going to sound like a ridiculous statement. Like something changed in your brain with all of it. I mean, what kind of led you down that path?
I think sharing things with you was a kind of a fellowship in similar mindset. It's like, oh man, look, here's a guy that's reading Thich Nhat Hanh. Oh, how great is that? You know, because it's one of those things that I couldn't tell you how I discovered him. I don't recall. All I'm glad is that I did. And so it was wonderful to find somebody else who was reading these things because, okay, we're all going to be better people for having read him. You know, having his version of mindfulness. Meditation, same thing. You know, okay, wow. You know, it's why doesn't everybody use these tools that are out there? Because we'd be better. Now, the latest thing that I'm reading is a concept called heart math.
Okay.
All right. Heart math, the basis of that is that the heart and the brain, the heart works like a brain, and the brain, of course, works like a brain, but they work in conjunction with each other. Okay. And when they're synced up, we give off electrical pulses that can be measured, and it's much like meditation that the TM people in Fairfield say that if you get a bunch of meditators in the room, they give off this positive vibration that other people can feel. Well, same thing with the heart math people, except they've got a machine that you clip on your ear and can measure where the brain and the heart are synced with each other. It's a fascinating piece of, it's another tool that if I were still in the business, I would start out a session with, okay, let's see where you're at today. How well is your heart synced with your brain? And all it is breathing. And you look at a scale, and it shows how synced you are.
Clip on the earlobe, and it somehow measures if your heart is synced with your brain.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit like bullshit.
Well, it does. It sounds a lot like bullshit. But when you put it in together with everything else, and they make a wireless version that you have an app on your iPhone, and they also make a version that goes into your laptop.
Okay.
And it's for those of us who are open-minded, it doesn't really seem like quackery if you've read all the other kinds of things.
Which I totally admit that I haven't. And I think that here's my opinion. So I've spent a lot of years in Fairfield now because of Lori. And I've read a lot of stuff. My master's degree is in religion, and I was a chaplain, and now I'm basically an atheist, but I still sort of see utilities of spirituality and faith.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of utility in a lot of the practices, be it, definitely in meditation, but and then some of the other ones, but it so treads the line of woo-woo weirdo-ness that I think a lot of people get turned off by it's like meditation is great, and like, okay, I'm with you. And then through the numerous chakras and the third eyes, and you can read people's minds and go, oh God, this shit again. And then people turn themselves off to it, just like right-wing religious idiots. I guess any religious idiots can sort of put stuff out there that it's like, we didn't get to some of the good pieces because it got couched in such weird spiritual terms that it kind of turns people off.
Yeah,
so.
with the heart math, there's wireless, it works through Bluetooth, and there's wired, and it gives you a nice display, and it shows it shows the heart beating. So there's some science in there. So it's just interesting how that might be another tool.
And we'll see as time goes along. Certainly it's a place where people are wanting to do research. So like we said earlier, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi. I mean, people are longing for whatever that piece is that's missing.
Yeah.
And we're more connected now than ever with our technology, but yet it seems like we're as lonely as ever. Depression rates, you mentioned in veterans, but in a lot, the suicide rate in young people seems to be going up. And it's like, wow, people feel so lonely, but we're so connected. It's an interesting duality.
Yeah, and it's just like our research project. If I can give you a dog and it makes a difference, why wouldn't I do that? And so we don't know the results of that study yet. But
sure. The only side effect of having a dog is having to pick up after it, right? I mean,
that's right. Having to pick up and having to go for a walk. And, maybe one of the unanticipated side effects is health-wise for our veterans who are going to have to get off the couch and take the dog for a walk.
That's a positive. I would call that an effect, not a side effect, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that study that you were involved with.
All right. There's 3 venues that were chosen to give away dogs. And the research question is, can a dog improve the quality of life for a veteran with PTSD? So half the dogs are service dogs, half the dogs are companion dogs. And it was a random selection of who got what kind of dog. So my job was to recruit veterans to sign up to be part of this study. As they signed up for the study, we assigned them a dog. We gave them a monthly stipend to defray the cost of having a dog. We gave them insurance to pay for any medical cost related to the dog. Their commitment was 2 years, and then after the 2 years, they could, if they chose, keep the dog. And then during that period of time, we would visit with them on a regular basis to make sure the dog was healthy and well taken care of. And then we would do questionnaires to measure the veterans' mental health.
Mm-hmm.
To get into the study, they had to have a referral from their psychiatrist. They had to have the diagnosis of PTSD, and they had to meet a level of severity with PTSD in order to get in.
Okay.
So it was a lot of things that went into thinking of this study. All the dogs were trained at 1 of 3 kennels. So we tried to factor in similarity so that we knew the dogs were trained the same. It was the same breed. So you try to make things the same so there's not any variables that might influence the outcome of the study.
Mm-hmm. And so when did the study wrap up?
July of this year.
Of this year.
Yeah.
So it was just very recently.
Very recently, and they're putting the data together now,
Crunching
and
numbers
we hope
now.
that within a couple months we'll have an outcome.
So what are you doing to keep yourself busy now that the study's over and you're retired? And what's up with you now?
I'm waiting for the next job offer. I've never had to apply for a job.
Okay.
Somebody would always call me and say, "Hey, we got this job. Are you interested?" So that may happen again, or I might decide just to stay home and read and ride my bicycle, or I may look for something. I don't know. Anything's possible.
You thought about writing a book?
Well, I have written a book.
I led you into that one.
Yes, you did. While I was deployed, I kept a diary because I wanted my grandkids to know what Grandpa did. And so I would write a page or two pretty regularly in my diary so that they knew what I was doing when I was deployed. And then when I came home, I typed it into a word processing program, added pictures, so they would get an idea of what it was all about and what it was like for me. And then I found a publisher and I self-published it. And now I'm giving copies to people who I think will appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I gave a copy, of course, to my grandkids. And they're too young to really appreciate it, but I've done that. And now, I like to give speeches. Doing events like this are fun for me. I like to get into the classrooms. And when I can get into a classroom, I tell my story because particularly for social work students, I want them to know that passions change over time. Whatever you're passionate about today, go seek that passion out, but understand next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, your passion may be different. And you have to understand that. But be passionate about something.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk a lot about how we hope that there are young people listening. It's why we began with what does a social worker do and how do you train? Cooper and I talk about that a lot. He's very modest, saying that he's the dumb one, his brother's the smart one. But I mean, Cooper's an incredible artist and musician, videographer, but he just turned 24, and so we talk a lot about because if I don't speak for you, but school is not your favorite thing. So kind of like you say, what's your passion now, and kind of what can you go for? I can't wait to read the book. I was fortunate enough you gave me a copy before we started, but I think there's so much value in the experiences you've had and the stories that you tell. I think it's really great. I'll say, and I promised myself I would say this to you on the air. If it weren't for having my daughter will be 4 soon. If it weren't for having a little kid, I would try to join the Air Guard. The thought of deploying when I have a little kid, it's when I was in before, I was single. I mean, I had a girlfriend, but I wasn't married. I didn't have a family. The thought of deploying was exciting and oh, this is cool. And like you say, go with my team. I wanted to be with my team, and I wanted to be a part of that unit and support my brothers and sisters and so forth. I don't know, man. I don't know that I could do it. I'll be 41 next month, so I have plenty of time. If I can go when I'm 60, I could wait another 12 years or so and go in when Mackenzie's a little whatever. But I think what you did is inspiring beyond words. There's just not words for it. So I'm so grateful that you came on to talk about everything. We're going to try to wrap up here. We're getting close to 2 hours. We like to give people a chance at the end to say anything that they want. Are there websites that you think people should go to? Are there ways they can get a hold of you if they want to hear more? I mean, you talked about a next job coming in or speaking gigs. How would you like to put yourself out there if you do?
Well, the idea is to talk to young people and just say, keep the doors open. Don't shut down. Listen for opportunities. They're there. Everybody has a story to tell. All you got to do is listen. Lately I've been reaching out to my high school friends and say, let's write an oral history of our high school. And we're going to start this. Everybody write something. We're going to start it like this. Answer this question. There was this time when. Okay? And the end up the story would be, don't tell mom and dad.
Yeah.
Right? And let's just do that. And automatically when you say that, everybody's going to start, you can see them.
The wheels
start.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you could have a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
Just get your friends. These are the stories that you would tell at high school reunions. You'd be sitting across the table from somebody and say, hey, do you remember this time when? And just go from there.
Right. I would read a book like that. I would watch a miniseries like that. The whole inspiration for a show like this is I just meet such interesting people, and I have interesting friends like you. And, it just was, I like to have conversations, and we thought, let's throw a microphone and a camera or two on and kind of see what happens. So, we always say to our guests, we're looking for interesting people. If there are other people that that you think would be great for the show, let me know. Give me their contact information. I'd be happy to talk about having them on. And, we're just so glad that you came out to share, and we'll let you know, obviously, all about when we're going to release everything.
Okay.
You're a few weeks out, but we'll definitely do that.
Right,
so, any final words you want to say before we go?
No, I haven't said anything about Chair Force yet tonight, but it's been a pleasure. I had a good time, and thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And for everybody listening, this is your show. We want to know what kind of people you want us to talk to. If you know any interesting people, our email's down below in the description. Let us know. And if there are specific people, get me in touch with them. I'd love to have them on the show. And if that's it from Cooper and from Dan, we'll thank you all for listening, and we'll see you right here when we do our very next episode. Good night, everybody.